So we've gone ahead and looked at expressions, paint maps, messing around with the attributes for our XGen. Let's hide that. Now let's go ahead and take a look at modifiers. One thing we are not going to do at this moment is we're not having like controlling the direction of the hairs, right? So we should have like a flow to the hairs, kind of just doing this like full on just like static electricity thing. We'll take a look at that with guides and groovable splines in a little bit. So I'm going to come over here to modifiers. So in modifiers, we're going to add modifiers to this modifier stack. So this modifier stack is essentially going to list a bunch of modifiers, and the order they're in matters. And we'll take a look at that in a second. So when you open this up, this little plus icon, you're going to see a bunch of different modifiers. Most of these are more of like utility based modifiers, but we're going to be focusing on the noise or the look based modifiers. So these are the ones that are going to be affecting the look of the groom, whereas a lot of these ones like force and preserve clumps and groom bake are all kind of like utility things that are just making XGen work for different purposes. So I'm going to start with clumping. So clumping, noise, coil, and then cut are the ones that we're going to be looking at. So I'll start with clumping. And so with clumping, when you add it, nothing happens. You'll see like a little error pop up that says clumping guides missing. That's totally normal. What we need to do first is, before we mess around with any of these values, is we need to generate what's called clumping guides. So these are essentially, what a clumping is going to do is it's like, imagine if you were using gel in your hair and you're running it through your hair. Like a lot of your hairs are going to start like grouping together and sticking together into like bigger chunks. And hair does this naturally, right? The hair is not always perfectly straight. Some people have that kind of hair. But a lot of people's hair, kind of clumps together so that you have like, tens to hundreds of hairs in like one bigger object. So we'll go ahead and come down here to click Setup Maps. And in here, we can do, up here, we're going to really just mess around up here. We're not going to worry about down here very much. I'm going to click on Generate. And you'll see these are the guides for the clumping. You can think of them as like magnets. And all the hairs that are around it are going to be drawn towards, from the root to tip, are going to be drawn towards that magnet. So how far these are spaced apart is going to determine how many clumps we have. If I go ahead and click on Save, you can see these are going to be pretty big clumps. And wherever those guides were, the hair that's surrounding it is going to kind of be drawn to it. And the region that is defining, like why is this hair right here drawn to this one and not to that one? It's more or less just like closest distance, but it's actually creating a texture map. And we don't really want to look at that texture map, but it's using what's similar to a region map, which we'll come back to later when we do guides. But if I go ahead and click on this right here, color preview, you can see that these guides, or these XGen hairs, are picking up the color of the map underneath. And so it's essentially like a fractally, or not fractally, a Voronoi kind of patterned color noise image. And those big blocks of color are kind of defining regions of hair that are grouped to one guide. Don't really have to worry about that too much, but that's just generally what was going on right there. So if we go ahead, and I'll keep this how it is right now. Up here for mask, that's just turning it on and off, right? I wouldn't use this for clumping, but if I just set that to rand, and then just from like 0 to 1, and then set that to semicolon, or not semicolon. I'm not adding any more lines underneath. Remember, the last line does not want a semicolon. Click Apply, and you can see some of those hairs are being drawn to it, some of them aren't, right? And if I set that to like 0.5 to 1, click Apply, right? Now it's a little bit stronger, and if I don't have any of them quite go to 1, actually in this case I'd let them go to 1, I'd set it like 0.9. And let's maybe set this a little bit higher, click Apply, right? So that's just kind of like randomly, each hair is going to get a slightly different mask value, and if it's 0, right, then none of them are clumping, and if it's 1, they're fully clumping. Okay, so the clump value right here, this is one I like to reset to a slider, and then I edit that slider so it doesn't go to -1, it just goes to 0.0. Click Apply. And so this is essentially is just the clumping effect, right? As we turn this on, right, our hairs are being drawn more and more towards those poles, those clumping guides that are like magnets. So this is essentially the strength of those magnets, kind of having a very similar effect as a mask, but this right here, you're going to see this kind of graph on a lot of these modifiers. And so what they're doing is essentially controlling the strength of this effect per part of the hair, right? So you'll see the roots of these hairs are actually like not being drawn too much, and then it gets stronger and stronger and stronger towards the tip of the hair, right? If I set a new point right here and I start dragging on that, you can see I can make a earlier part of the hair kind of start to draw towards that clump guide faster, right? So I can kind of control that shape, right? And then, you know, I can pull that tip off so the tip doesn't go all the way through, but maybe I clump them in there, right? So there's all kinds of cool little, you know, things you can do there. For the most part, you're usually going to be kind of doing from root to tip, and then just adding a little randomization or, you know, kind of differentiation there to help it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set this with a lower density, so it's kind of like really low right there. So I'll go ahead and set, and let's do like 10. I'll click on generate, click save, right? And so this is probably something more I'd expect like a spiky haired kid to have, right? And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and usually when you do clumping, you would also do multiple levels of clumping. This is a lot of natural hairs, especially longer hair. It's gonna have different levels of clumping to that. So I'll add another clumping guide to it. Again, there's no guides, so we have to set up our maps. We go ahead and usually if it's higher up on the stack, I want more guides. So this one has 10. This one's above it. I want something higher than 10. So let's say I'm going to go up to like 35 and click on generate, click on save. And so what I'm doing is even in each of those clumps, you can see now it's making smaller clumps. And so what's kind of cool about that is I can come in here to this clump guide right here. And then I can go ahead and maybe dial back that clump a bit. So, you know, there's like bigger groupings of hair, and then inside that, there's smaller groupings of hair. If I want to turn any of them off, I can just click on this. And if I want anything to be occurring before the other one, right, because it's doing big clumps and then small clumps, I can just reorder these. I don't want to do that for this one. Some other things that we can take a look at in here, a lot of these settings down here are kind of weird, and they're not very easily explained through the documentation. The one I do want to kind of call attention to is cut. So cut is going to be giving you like a randomization value for how you're going to cut them shorter, fairly certain. So I'll set this to like 0.5 to 1. Click apply. And so it's going to actually shorten the clumps themselves. So those groupings of hairs are actually going to be randomly cut. I'll set that back to 0. The other one I like to do is noise. So we'll set this to, let's set that to 1. And then right now it's having no effect, but you can see it's going to kind of start randomly rotating all of the clumps. So the clumps aren't going to be kind of sticking out straight out. They're going to be kind of randomly rotating along their, like that clump guide's normal. So those two are ones I tend to use if I use any of them. Okay. So I'm going to take a brief detour back into expressions. So let's take a look at this. So you can see that each of these clumps, I'll turn off the second layer. We'll just only focus on the top layer, or the base layer. So you can see all these clumps are almost exactly the same size. Some of them are slightly different, but for the most part, they're all the exact same size. And the reason why is because when we set up those maps, you can see it's evenly adding a density of 10 for all these guides. So it's just evenly placing them all across there based on this density. I can randomize that. I'm just using this as an example of randomizing. I can do it in different areas too. If I come over here to this mask, I can choose some areas where it has a lower density, just like I would in my primitives tab. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and let's make sure I'm not in paint mode. I'm going to come over here to this expression editor, click on this, and I'm going to load an expression from samples. So XGen has a ton of really cool, essentially snippets of code. And if you know where to find them, like for instance, if you want to set a color, it's kind of confusing. It's not actually color. You find it under UI. But if you want to set like a static solid color like red, green, blue, and you want to change those values, it'll give you that like little code snippet that's going to kind of set it up. That's not what I'm coming over here for. But anyways, there's a ton of really cool expressions, but the problem is some of the coolest ones are hidden in this really annoyingly nested folder. So you come into samples, XGen, water-related expressions of all things, and then you go to noise. And so you have all these noise parameters that are really cool. So I'm going to do Voronoi, click apply. You can see I have all these settings here, which makes it look really overwhelming. Don't worry about it too much. If you open it here, we have this little cool preview window, and I can actually kind of get a sense of what that noise is going to look like. I'm going to turn off color, so just change that little slider right there. And I'm going to go ahead and increase the coarse. So you can see it's giving me these big chunks of values, right? So black is going to be 0, white's going to be 1, and everything in between is going to be like 0.5, 0.6. So if you think of that with the density, it's going to multiply that. And if I click accept, and I click on generate, now you'll see there's some areas that have higher density and some areas with really low density. I might go ahead and bring up that gain a little bit. I like to kind of come in here and do it. So let's go ahead and bring the gain up. Okay, I thought that would work. Let's go ahead and lower the contrast. Let's do that. Click accept, generate, just because I don't want any areas where there's like a huge clump, and click. So once I'm done with that, I'll click on save. And now you can see these clumps are actually randomly scaled, right? And the higher contrast that noise was, like the more variance there is in the size of those clumps. So it's something that's, I mean, that's a little too much, but it's kind of cool. It's, it gives you a little bit more of that randomization. And then I add that back on top. So it can give you just a little bit more of an organic look to it. So I just wanted to show you that. That's another example. But any of these, I can go ahead and add an expression. So I might show you guys another expression once we get to the noise.